Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Teresa Lewis, Director of the HHS Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. As part of our Acquisition Learning Series, we have with us today Mariana Pardo, the Director of the SBA Hubzone program. I'm thrilled. One of our greatest challenges is meeting our Hubzone and service-disabled veteran goals, and that is the case for the majority of the agencies across the federal government. Although there are a few exceptions, we all need assistance with awarding contracts to Hubzone firms. There have been a lot of changes, as you all are aware, so Mariana is going to share with us, but she's also brought with us a procurement attorney from the SBA Office of General Counsel, Miss Allison Muller. And so I'm thrilled. I know that you're looking forward to it. Let me turn it over to you. Let me welcome Mariana, always. Thank you so much. This is I think your second visit here at HHS.
It is.
And we want you to come back. We're considering you family.
Thank
you so much for joining us today.
Great. My pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm very excited to be here, particularly with my partner, Allison. We've worked together for many years, and this is a great opportunity. Today, basically, this is what we're set up to do. I'm going to provide an overview of the program, what SBA does, the authority of SBA, and then we're going to go right into the contracting pieces, what the relevant sections of the FAR and the CFR are, so that you leave this session with a better understanding on how to set aside, how to sole source, how to apply the price evaluation preference, etc., on your Hubzone solicitations, Hubzone contracts. Wanted to let you know that SBA administers the Hubzone program, and this is important to understand because you may be presented with a business card of a firm that says that they're Hubzone. The fact that they're a Hubzone firm doesn't mean that they're certified, and unless you verify the certification in the dynamic small business system. A firm could be located in a Hubzone, could even have employees in a Hubzone, and yet not be Hubzone certified. So that's an area that you have to be cautious about when you're presented with marketing material from a firm and you see that they say, we're a Hubzone firm. Always do your due diligence in verifying that certification, and we'll go through that. So the firm has to apply for certification, and they have to, once we do an analysis of the facts, we collect supporting documentation, and once we determine that they're in compliance, we approve them, and that approval refreshes their profile in the dynamic small business search. That profile, in turn, refreshes their SAM profile. So that's how, when you're going into the SAM profile of a particular firm, you see that it says, yes, that they're Hubzone certified. That data comes from the dynamic small business search. The dynamic small business search is the list that we have to maintain by law and in accordance to our regulations. So that is the list of certified firms. Do not accept or do not ask for the letter, the certification letter. The firm may have it in their marketing material, it's perfectly fine. But again, a firm could have been decertified 2 days ago or even the night before they're presenting that letter. Maybe we decertified them in connection to a protest that we were adjudicating. So that's very important. If you see a certification letter or a recertification letter, basically saying, congratulations, you completed your recertification, again, you have to do your due diligence, validating that the firm still appears in the list. That's the third bullet that you see on the screen. So only those firms that appear in that list are going to be eligible for the Hubzone contracting preferences and awards. So the contracts that are available, including the multiple award contracts, are the ones that you see here. So you have the sole source awards, you have set-asides, including partial set-asides, and we're going to go through all these. We have awards to qualified Hubzone small business concerns through a full and open competition after the price evaluation preference is applied. We have awards based on a reserve for Hubzone small business concerns in a solicitation for a multiple award. And also, we have orders set aside for Hubzone firms against a multiple award contract that was awarded in full and open competition. So the requirements to bid, we go back to that list. So the firm, when they are submitting, at the time the firm submits the initial offer on a specific Hubzone contract, it is certifying to you as a contracting official that they're a qualified small business concern that appears in the list. That's the Dynamic Small Business System list. That there have been no material changes in the circumstances that could affect their eligibility since the date of certification, meaning that at the time that they're submitting the initial offer, the firm is doing their own self-evaluation. They need to ensure that they're meeting all the requirements, particularly the ones that fluctuate a lot is the residency requirement. So they need to take a look, make sure that they have at least 35% of their employees residing in a Hubzone. They're certifying that they're small under the NAICS that is assigned to that procurement, and that they're also certifying that they will attempt to maintain the required percentage of employees who are Hubzone residents during the performance of the contract. And that last one is in connection to the statute. Yes, the statute that established this program actually requires that too. To be eligible for that contract that you're going to be awarding, the company has to be eligible both at the time of initial offer and at the time of award. What that means to you is that when you receive those offers, you have to go to the list, to the Dynamic Small Business System list, and check, make sure that it says that they're certified. If they're not certified, as you're checking those bids that are coming in, then you need to remove them from consideration because the firm is not a Hubzone certified firm. When you're about to award that contract, you need to do the same thing because time has transpired from the time that you receive those offers to now is the time of award. And you do need to do that due diligence, go back into the DSBS, the Dynamic Small Business System. In general, a joint venture may be considered a Hubzone firm if both joint ventures are certified as a Hubzone firm. Well, or more, if you have a joint venture that is, all the members need to be Hubzone certified. And each concern is small under the NAICS code that is assigned to the contract. There is a change coming up that actually will remove that requirement that all the members of the joint venture be Hubzone certified. And we can cover that a little bit later in this presentation. I wanted to show you how that dynamic small business search, many of you are using this already, so this is basically what you will be seeing when you click on the link for the dynamic small business search. And basically, and I'll show, there's a couple of more slides after this, but you're going to be scrolling down to kind of like the middle of the page because that's how the certification is displayed. So you're going to see that in each profile, you're going to have two fields that are relevant for the certification. Are they certified in the certification date? The certified, yes, no. Certification date refers to the initial certification date, meaning that if you're checking on a firm's certification status and the certification date says January 5th, 2001, it's perfectly fine. You don't need to concern yourselves with, has this firm been undergoing recertification? The recertification process is internal to SBA, and that certification date in the Dynamic Small Business System does not change to reflect subsequent recertifications. By the way, recertifications take place every 3 years, so that you know. Let's move to the next. This is an example of a currently certified Hubzone firm. As you will see there kind of in the middle of the page, you see that the Hubzone certified says yes, and then it has that date, okay? The next one is an example of a decertified firm. So let's say that you received offers, you checked, you saw that it said yes. When you received those offers, you saw that there was a date, it was fine. Then you're about to award the contract maybe 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, and you go back in and you see something like this. It means that the firm was decertified. It does have the date, which causes confusion sometimes, but you need to focus more on that no that is checked, okay? It means that the firm was certified back in 2007, but subsequently was decertified. By the way, most of the decertifications occurred voluntarily, are usually the firms that are voluntarily decertifying for one reason or another. The most common, by the way, reason for decertification is because the firm is no longer meeting the residency requirement. I wanted to let you know that right off the bat. This is an example of a non-Hubzone firm, non-Hubzone small business concern. Very important to see the difference here. As you see a no, but you don't see a date. So if you receive offers from a firm and you go to the Dynamic Small Business System and you see something like this, you know that that firm is not a Hubzone certified. You can certainly encourage them to reach out to us and perhaps consider applying. We would work with that firm, obviously. But you cannot consider offers from a firm that where the profile displays in this manner, nor you can award a contract to a firm that is not certified. So now I am going to introduce you to Allison Muller. She's my partner. She is from the Office of Procurement Law, and she's going to be educating us on all the different aspects of the contracting world with the Hubzone certified firms. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you. We're going to start with the relationship among the various small business programs. As you are aware, SBA has a number of small business programs, which include the Hubzone program, the 8A small business program, the veteran-owned small business program, the service-disabled veteran-owned small business program, and the women-owned small business program. So the question often comes, are certain of those programs prioritized above others? Currently, today, under our statute, there's no order of precedence in general. In the past, there was confusion, and there's been a statutory correction to fix that confusion. So you can go into most procurements prepared to award to any of these types of small businesses. When you're determining which socioeconomic program to use, the contracting officer, should be considering your market research. So you should always look at what firms are out there and able to do the work. And then you should also look at your particular agency's success up to that point at meeting your specific small business goals. So if your Hubzone numbers are particularly low, then that's an excellent reason to try to award to a Hubzone firm. If, on the other hand, you're doing great with Hubzone, then maybe 8A is a good way to go. This next slide discusses more of kind of how the various small business programs interact with each other. And a big difference depends on whether you're awarding a contract that falls below the simplified acquisition threshold versus a contract that is valued at above the simplified acquisition threshold. So currently the simplified acquisition threshold is $150,000. Here on the left-hand column, we're talking about contracts valued between the current micro purchase threshold of $3,500 and the simplified acquisition threshold of $150,000. If you're looking at a contract within that range, then the acquisition is automatically reserved for small business. This means that you must award to small business. However, you may award to any type of small business in this particular price range. You can award to a Hubzone. You can also do a small business set aside, or you can award under the 8A program, the SDVO program, or the WOSB program. Alternatively, if you're looking at a contract that's above the simplified acquisition threshold, meaning above $150,000, then that's when the rule of two comes into play. You may be familiar with the rule of two. And the rule of two is met if you, the contracting officer, expect to receive offers from at least two responsible small businesses, and any types of small businesses that is, and you can make an award at a fair price. So if both of those two criteria are met, then you know that you've met the rule of two, and the outcome of that is that you have to award to small business in that case. In this case, before, again, let's go back. On the left-hand side of the column, in that bottom corner, we see that if you're below the simplified acquisition threshold, you can do a small business set-aside, Hubzone set-aside, any type of small business award. Above the simplified acquisition threshold, once you've determined that the rule of two is met and you know you have to award to a small business, you can't automatically award a small business set-aside. In that case, the other socioeconomic programs take precedent above small business set-asides. So you should look at awarding a Hubzone set-aside or awarding under the 8A program, the SDVO program, or the WOSB program, with, of course, one exception. We always have exceptions to these rules. In this case, if you've determined that the rule of two is met, you know that you need to award to a small business, you know you can't automatically do a small business set-aside without looking at the other programs, your hands are tied if the contract is already being performed by an 8A company, or if the contract has been accepted by the 8A program for performance under that program. That's known as the once 8A, always 8A rule. So if it's an 8A contract, then you have to either award under the 8A program, or you have to request release from the 8A program from the 8A program director. Next, we'll be talking about Hubzone set-asides and Hubzone sole source awards. And here we've included both the FAR citation for these rules as well as the SBA specific program rules. And they should always be consistent, but we always say that if our rules differ, it could be in terms of an update. There's sometimes a lag between our updates and the FAR updates. We generally update our rules first when our statute changes, and then the FAR generally waits for our final rule to come out, and the FAR Council will update the FAR. So if there is a conflict, we would encourage you to reach out to our office to resolve the conflict, but in general, we say you should defer to our rules. But again, please reach out if you see conflicts that don't seem to have an explanation. So for Hubzone set-asides, under our rules, the contracting officer may set aside acquisitions above the micro-purchase threshold for Hubzone firms. For acquisitions exceeding the simplified acquisition threshold, on the other hand, the contracting officer must consider Hubzone set-asides before considering a small business set-aside, which again we covered in the last slide. You have to consider the socioeconomic programs before doing a small business set-aside when you're above the simplified acquisition threshold. You also, if you're looking at doing a Hubzone acquisition, should try to do a Hubzone set-aside before doing a Hubzone sole source award. And we'll explain in a slide coming up as to why that is exactly. In order to do a Hubzone set-aside, the contracting officer has to have a reasonable expectation that offers will be received from two Hubzone firms or more, two or more Hubzone firms. And again, that award can be made at fair market price. So this obviously looks very similar to the rule of two. The same general rule applies when you would like to do a Hubzone set-aside. So if you've gone through this whole process, you're above the simplified acquisition threshold, or under, either way you've determined that you either have to or you should, based on the rule of two, do a Hubzone set-aside. You've gone through the process of issuing a solicitation. You have received offers. What happens if you receive only one offer or no offers? This is covered in our regulations, presumably because it came up enough that we realized we needed to include it. So if you receive only one acceptable offer from a Hubzone firm, you should award to that firm. Pretty simple. If, on the other hand, you don't receive any acceptable offers from Hubzone firms, then you should withdraw that solicitation, and you should, in general, resolicit as a small business set-aside. However, if your market research doesn't indicate that that's appropriate, then you may need to take other steps. But in general, you would have determined that there are small businesses out there, and so it's often a good next step to move to a small business set-aside at that stage. So, Hubzone sole source awards, which I said we'd get to. There are a number of rules that apply to how you can award a Hubzone sole source contract. In this case, in order to award a sole source under the Hubzone program, the contracting officer must not have a reasonable expectation that offers would be received from two or more Hubzones. In other words, based on your market research, you have reason to believe that there's only one Hubzone firm out there that's able to do the work. If there's more than one, you should be doing a set-aside. If there's less than one, then a sole source isn't going to work either. You should move to a different program. There are dollar thresholds that apply to when you can use a Hubzone sole source award. There are ceilings on how big of a contract can be sole sourced under the Hubzone program. And these numbers look similar to the thresholds you'll see for the 8A program as well as for the SDVO program. So you shouldn't have to remember too much. If you know these thresholds in general, then you'll know what they are for Hubzone. So for all of these programs, if you're awarding a contract that's under $7 million for a manufacturing contract or under $4 million for any other type of contract, you can do a Hubzone sole source award. If, on the other hand, the contract is valued above these thresholds, then you cannot do a Hubzone sole source award. This little red box you see on the side of the slide reminds us to check for FAR inflation changes. So obviously the FAR Council updates acquisition-related thresholds every 5 years. They were recently updated, I believe, in July of 2015 is when they were most recently updated. So that bumped us up to $7 million for manufacturing, and I've updated that in our slide here. As we mentioned before, based on the once 8A, always 8A rule, if you have a requirement that's being performed by an 8A participant or has been accepted for award to an 8A participant by the 8A program, you again can't do a Hubzone sole source award. If the acquisition is under the simplified acquisition threshold, you should not be doing a Hubzone sole source award. You need to, in order to do a Hubzone sole source award, you should have determined affirmatively that the contractor is responsible and able to perform the contract. If you determine that the contractor is not responsible, then of course that would be referred to SBA for a certificate of competency, which is a COC. An SBA in that case determines whether or not confirms whether or not the firm is responsible. And then finally, in order to do a Hubzone sole source award, you need to determine that you can make an award at a fair and reasonable price. And then at the very end of the slide, you see that under our rules, SBA has the right to appeal a contracting officer's decision not to make a Hubzone sole source award. So if all the criteria listed above are met, and a contracting officer still decides not to do a Hubzone sole source award, SBA has the right to intervene. Next, as we see here, we'll be discussing set-asides of orders under the Hubzone program. So under the FAR, agencies can set aside orders placed against multiple award contracts for Hubzone firms. And if you do this, you don't need a justification and approval. This is an automatically treated as an exception to fair opportunity that's allowable under the rules. An agency may also set aside a part or parts of a multiple award contract for Hubzone firms. In addition, an agency can reserve one or more contract awards for Hubzone firms under full and open multiple award procurements. And finally, an agency may set aside orders and blanket purchase agreements under the GSA schedule for Hubzone firms. So these are all somewhat new rules as of maybe the last 5 years or so. I don't know the exact timeline, but we got a lot of questions. In the past, there were a few GAO decisions that fed into these rule changes. The rules as they stand are that agencies may set aside orders under any of these procurement methods. Again, I will emphasize may. That indicates that it's discretionary for the contracting officer. The contracting officer is not required to set aside orders under these circumstances, under the current rules. So this goes into a little bit more detail as to what happens if a contracting officer decides to set aside an order for Hubzone firms. So under the FAR, for both orders and BPAs against the GSA schedule, as well as orders against multiple award contracts in general, regardless, the FAR specifies that the SBA program eligibility requirements in Part 19, as well as in SBA's regulations, would apply. So what does this mean? It means, for example, that if it's a Hubzone joint venture, the Hubzone joint venture requirements would apply to that order. And likewise, if you're doing a Hubzone order set aside, then the Hubzone performance of work requirements would apply. In addition, the Hubzone protest processes would kick in, so those orders set aside for Hubzone firms could the prospective awardee's status as a Hubzone firm could be protested under our protest regulations. Next, we'll be talking about the Hubzone price evaluation preference, which is always a favorite, and we hope to get questions if it's confusing. We usually do. So the Hubzone price evaluation preference is used only if you're procuring in full and open competition. It only applies to full and open procurements, doesn't apply to set-asides, doesn't apply to sole source awards. It also does not apply if price is not a selection factor. So the common example there is a contract for architecture and engineering services. And the reason, as you'll see in an upcoming slide, is the price evaluation preference specifically impacts the price of the offer that you're looking at. So if price isn't a factor, it doesn't make sense to adjust a price. There's no price to adjust. Finally, on this slide, the price evaluation preference is not applied in situations where all fair and reasonable offers are accepted. The common example here are the GSA schedules or other multiple award schedule contracts where they're accepting everyone, and there's not the same type of evaluation that takes place if it's not a GSA schedule contract. All right, here we're discussing how specifically to apply the price evaluation preference. So again, we're applying if we're looking at a contract in full and open competition, and we only apply it if the lowest responsible offer is a large business. So if the prospective awardee is a large business, then this is when the Hubzone price evaluation preference, also known as the PEP, comes into play. In order to apply the Hubzone PEP, you add a factor of 10% to that prospective awardee, who's a large business, as well as any offers from Hubzone firms that have waived the PEP affirmatively. And you would also apply the 10% to the offers of any small business concerns that are not in line for award, that, in other words, are not the apparent successful offerer. If they're second, third, fourth, or farther down the line, you would apply that 10% factor to any of those businesses. So the opposite of this is that you only apply the PEP you'll apply it to everyone except a Hubzone small business that has not waived the PEP. And here we're going to walk through a few examples of how to apply the price evaluation preference. On the left-hand side, we have the first example, where in this example, there's a Hubzone small business that submitted an offer of $113, a small business that submitted an offer of $103, and a large business who submitted an offer of $100. So as you can see in this case, the large business is the lowest responsive and responsible offerer with a $100 bid. So you would apply the PEP because the large business is in line for award. You apply the PEP to the large business as well as the small business who's not in line for award in this case. So on the left-hand side, you can see what happens after you apply 10% or multiply the offer by 1.1. The Hubzone firm has not waived the PEP, so their offer remains at 113. The small business, their offer comes for purposes of evaluating who's in line for award, $113.30, and the large business's offer is adjusted to $110. So in this example, as you can see, the application of the PEP does not benefit the Hubzone firm because the large business, despite the 10% added to their price, is still the lowest offerer. So you would maintain the large business as the lowest priced offerer in that example. In the second example, on the right-hand side, we have a Hubzone firm that submitted an offer of $100, a small business that submitted an offer of $97, and a large business who submitted an offer of $95. Once again, based on this, the large business is the lowest responsive offerer at 95. So you apply the 10% PEP to the large business as well as the small business since they're not the prospective awardee. And as a result, the Hubzone Firm stays at $100 because you don't apply the PEP to them. Then the small businesses offer is adjusted to $106.7, and the large businesses offer is adjusted to $104.5 or $104.50. So as you can see here, after the PEP is applied, the Hubzone small business has the lowest offer. So the PEP has benefited them, and they should be considered the first in line for award based on price. It's not on the slides, but important to point out that if you're doing a best value analysis, you should look at price first, apply the PEP, and then apply the best value analysis secondly. And lastly, we're going to talk about the limitations on subcontracting as well as the non-manufacturer rule. And here is where we mentioned earlier the rules have changed. This is where you'll see new rules in effect very shortly. Not quite, but very shortly. So I mentioned up here at the beginning of the slide in red that SBA published a final rule on May 31st of this year. And I have provided the Federal Register citation there. That rule has been published, but it's not effective until June 30th. But that's coming up, so these are good rules to know, not only because they will be in effect soon, but also because they are much easier to understand than the previous Hubzone limitations on subcontracting, and they're also consistent with all of the other programs, which we, of course, Mariana and I are very happy about because it was a source of heartburn for a lot of the contracting officers to want to award for under the Hubzone program, but recognize that the rules are not necessarily the same as those that they're used to seeing for the other programs. So the rules are consistent with the other programs. You should familiarize yourself with them because they apply to small business set-asides, all of SBA's set-aside programs now. In general, what you're looking at under the new limitations on subcontracting is the value of the contract. So under this rule, if you can spend, the prime contractor can spend no more than 50% of the value of the prime contract on subcontractors that are not Hubzone firms. If it's a service, we're starting in the top left, this is for a services contract. This is also for, those numbers, 50% also apply for a supplies contract if the prime contractor is the manufacturer. So we specify that 50% does not include subcontracts to other Hubzone firms. If you've been to other presentations about these new rules, you've heard it referred to potentially as similarly situated entities. This means that for any prime contractor under the new rule can spend no more than a certain percentage of the value of the prime contract on subcontractors, but that excludes, quote, similarly situated entities. Therefore, if it's a Hubzone prime contractor, similarly situated entities are Hubzone firms. So the calculation of the 50% for services and supplies contracts excludes other subcontracts to other Hubzone firms. All of these numbers should look pretty similar to what we've seen before. Under the new rules, however, the emphasis is now on the maximum amount that can be subcontracted rather than the minimum amount that the prime contractor must perform with their own employees. So under general construction, again, we're looking at the value of the prime contract, and we're looking at how much the prime contractor may subcontract to other firms. In this case, for a general construction contract, they can subcontract up to 85% of the value of the prime contract. Again, it's similar to the old rule, except the old rule was phrased to say that the prime contractor must perform at least 15% with their own employees. So same concept, but reversed. The focus is on how much the prime contractor is able to subcontract. And then finally, in the bottom right corner, for specialty trade construction, the prime contractor can spend no more than 75% of the value of the prime contract on subcontractors. And in this case, in both cases, for both general construction and specialty trade construction, when you're running these calculations, you would exclude the cost of materials. In this slide, I've included what the old rules provide. I'm not going to walk us through them because, as I've mentioned, they're about to go out of effect and they're more complicated. You can see there's more writing on this slide, so you can trust me that they were more complicated, and be happy that we've updated them with something more consistent. And then lastly, we'll talk about the non-manufacturer rule. So under the non-manufacturer rule, a Hubzone small business concern can submit an offer for supplies as a non-manufacturer if it meets the requirements of the rule as that rule is laid out in SBA's regulations at 121-406B1. And that citation remains the same under the new regulations that are coming out. Under current regulations, an additional requirement is that the actual manufacturer of the product being provided by the Hubzone non-manufacturer also had to be a Hubzone firm, meaning the company that in fact manufactured the products had to be a Hubzone firm. This is changing in the new rule that we've been discussing. So effective June 30th, that's no longer true. A Hubzone firm can qualify as a non-manufacturer by providing the end item of any small business. It doesn't need to be a Hubzone concern, although it must be a domestic small business. And that's consistent with how the non-manufacturer rule has applied to small business set-asides since before these rule changes. Under the current rules, just in case you have anything going on in the next couple weeks, there's no waiver for the non-manufacturer rule for Hubzone contracts, but again, this is changing starting June 30th, so you will be able to request waivers for Hubzone contracts. And again, that'll be nice because it'll make it consistent with the other programs. And then finally, for Hubzone contracts that are below $25,000 in total value, the rule is that the Hubzone must supply the end item of any manufacturer, small, large, regardless, as long as it's domestic. It's a domestic supplier. Sorry, a domestic manufacturer, that is. And question always comes up: when do you have to? How do I apply the limitations on subcontracting and the non-manufacturer rule, and what is the compliance period? So the Hubzone limitations on subcontracting and the non-manufacturer rule apply to all Hubzone contracts. And the Hubzone contract includes Hubzone set-asides, partial Hubzone set-asides, Hubzone reserves, orders that are set aside for Hubzone concerns, and then finally full and open. These rules apply if it's you've done full and open competition and the Hubzone price evaluation was applied, and as a result, the awardee is a Hubzone firm. The compliance period for both the limitations on subcontracting and the non-manufacturer rule for a full or partial set-aside, the compliance period is the base term and each subsequent option period. However, the contracting officer at any point at their discretion may require a concern to meet these comply with the limitations on subcontracting or the non-manufacturer rule for a particular order that is within the discretion of the contracting officer. And if they wish to do that, it should be specified in the solicitation. And then finally, for a reserve or an order set aside under full and open competition, the compliance period would be the term of the order. And this indicates that we've gone through all of those slides.
The next slides that we have there are just for your use. They have resources of general programmatic resources as to our website, and the following have some links, hyperlinks, that is for your use. And the last one actually contains our contact information, how you can reach to us, and the very final contains Allison's and mine contact information. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Mariana and Allison, let me just say thank you very much. Extremely informative.
Excellent.
Extremely informative. And it's good to see that Hubzone is becoming compliant with the other small business programs.
Definitely.
Making it easy.
It's making it much easier for the rest of us to use the program, because that's been the greatest concern from the contracting officials. And that is that there are certain requirements for Hubzone that don't apply for the other small business program, which makes it a lot harder.
Right.
So it's definitely good having
Yeah.
these new changes. That's really going to make it easier for us to use the program. Now, if you could certify more Hubzone firms, that would be great too. We can certainly use those.
By all means, I'm encouraging everybody on this call, if you have vendors that are not Hubzone certified, but you want to encourage them to look into the program, by all means, contact me. You can do a virtual introduction if you like, and we'll certainly work with the company and orient them into the program and help them understand the program and see if they can qualify. Definitely.
All right, fantastic. So can you do me a favor, please, while we're waiting for everyone to join us in the with their questions? Can you go over again how to use the Hubzone set-aside on the GSA schedule? Because that's a major question for the OSDBU office from the contracting officials.
Right.
Sure. So if you have a GSA schedule contract that you'd like to set aside for Hubzone firms, you'd like to set aside an order off of a GSA schedule contract for Hubzone firms, that's within a contracting officer's discretion. The rule of two would apply. So the contracting officer should review the GSA schedule, do their proper market research, and if there are 2 or more Hubzone firms that they expect to submit offers on that solicitation, and they believe award can be made at fair market price, then they can do a Hubzone set-aside off the schedule.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. So here are a couple of questions that we have, guys. I'll read them to you, and then if you could just respond, that would be great. So, regarding limitation on subcontracting for services on a Hubzone set-aside, can the following be done? Prime Hubzone is doing 30%. I feel like I need a chalkboard.
I know,
Yes.
me too.
Right?
Yes.
One Hubzone is doing 21%. The second Hubzone is doing 49%. Okay. Do you need a pen and a paper? Is this allowable under the final rule effective June 30th?
So of
All
course,
right.
if you ever have a specific contract in mind, I'll answer. But I want you to know that you should reach out, and so I can make sure I ask all the requisite questions that might apply to your situation. This is with the caveat, since I'm a lawyer, that I'm not saying affirmatively yes, you can do it in this case if this is reflective of a situation in real life, and you should absolutely reach out to our office. We can walk through it with you. But based on these numbers, so we're saying the prime contractor is doing 30%, one Hubzone sub is doing 21%.
Yep. And then the large is doing 49%.
So my reading of that is that Hubzone firms are performing 51% of the work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the similarly situated.
Based on the similarly situated rule, and they're subcontracting to non-Hubzone firms 49%. They are allowed to sub no more than 50%. So to me, this looks potentially allowable. I'll say.
Okay.
Yes.
All
That's a
right,
good answer.
fantastic. And if you have if you are an HHS contracting official and you have questions on a specific requirement, just let us know. Email your small business specialist or the OSDBU office, the deputy director, Michelle Street. We can answer your questions for you. All right, so let's see what else. I see a lot of accessing questions, and I think that's been resolved. So let me see if there are any other questions. All right. Okay. In one of your slides, you mentioned that you will provide the link for SBA where you can find the certification status of Hubzone. So it sounds like they're talking about the DSBS.
Yes, there is, in these slides, there are hyperlinks embedded in it. So you can access that way. You can also access it by going to the Hubzone website. If you go to the frequently asked section portion of the Hubzone website, it's actually the second question there. There is a question, say, where can I find a list of Hubzone firms? And if you click in there, there is a link that takes you directly to the dynamic small business search, and you can find the firm that way by searching. You can search by DUNS number or name also.
And it looks like, at least on my copy of slide 3, it's hyperlinked, but it looks like the link,
The full address,
the
thank
full
you.
URL is provided.
Yes,
so you
on
can
slide 3.
check out the third bullet on slide 3.
Thank you, Allie.
And I typically refer them to dsbs.sba.gov.
Another
which takes
site.
them there as well.
Yep.
And the training slides, if you were looking to the right of the screen, there is a link to the slides themselves, so you can print them. Mariana and Allison are referring to specific slide numbers, so you can obtain the training, the presentation there. So while we're waiting for other questions, you mentioned Part 19 applies under the schedule. I'm flabbergasted. Everybody says Part 19 doesn't apply. Can you explain that further?
Well, specifically, the FAR specifically says it. It's not just us making it up. It does specify in the FAR that Part 19 applies. So that means that all of the SBA eligibility requirements for the relevant small business programs apply. In the Hubzone context, that means that the Hubzone firm has to be, we didn't go into this on the slide, and maybe that's why there's outstanding confusion or questions, but
Yes.
that means all the eligibility stuff, which Mariana presents very often, sometimes without me, unfortunately, all of the Hubzone eligibility requirements. So the firm must be eligible at the time of offer and award. They must have been certified prior to submitting their offer. They have to have 35% of their employees residing in a Hubzone. Their principal office must be in a Hubzone. All of those same rules apply. In addition, the limitations on subcontracting, which we've now discussed, would apply, and the non-manufacturer rule would apply to those set-asides.
Okay, all right, fantastic.
And one thing I always forget to add to the slides is that the protest rules also would apply. So you can have a Hubzone protest if you've done a Hubzone set-aside against the schedule.
Okay, so that's extremely helpful. Thank
Great,
you.
great.
So is it in Part 8 where it states that Part 19 applies? Do you know, Allie?
I think I have them right here. I can give you the exact citations. I tried to include all of them at least. Almost. My deck automatically goes to price evaluation preference because there's always so many questions there.
Always.
So, here on, this is if you're looking at the deck slide 20, we have the FAR citation itself. So it's in both FAR Part 8 as well as Part 16.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So hopefully all of you have found that. I was in a meeting yesterday where the contracting official said Part 19 doesn't apply. So
Yeah.
it's excellent that you guys have put that in there. That's going to help
Great.
Good.
reduce the confusion around that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, so I did have a question regarding the price evaluation preference, which I'm very familiar with, but I did not realize that it did not apply in the awards for multiple award contracts.
Right. So I have not personally walked through the process of evaluating. I'm not intimately familiar with what GSA does to evaluate the offers they receive, but my understanding is it really can't be applied to that context because they're accepting everyone. They're not ranking them in the same way you are if you're making a single award. So I think it should be intuitive when you're doing it. Obviously, when you're just thinking about all these things in the abstract, it's hard to imagine that scenario and what rules should and shouldn't and can't apply, etc. But I think that when GSA awards those types of contracts, they're not looking at price, they're not ranking.
Right.
That's my understanding of it. So there would be it wouldn't fit into that scenario, really.
Okay, fantastic. So we've gotten a question, and the audience wants to know, under full and open purchases, you indicated that unless the Hubzone firm waives the PEP, then you do not apply the 10% increase to the Hubzone price. How does the Hubzone firm waive the PEP?
That's a good question. So in general, there's a bit of lack of clarity on this issue, but in general, I would argue that the PEP FAR clause should be read into contracts. So if there's a full and open competition, obviously a diligent contracting officer should include that clause to indicate that the price evaluation will be applied if it's appropriate. If it's in the solicitation and there's a small business that's submitting an offer and they don't want the PEP applied to them, or they don't apply to that solicitation, a reason that they might not want to is because
a small business.
What did I say?
A small business.
Oh, yes. A Hubzone small business may want the PEP waived if they can't meet the limitations on subcontracting, for example, or it doesn't fit in their business plan to do it for this great contract. Whatever the case may be, that may be an instance where they would want the PEP to be waived. And I don't have a great answer except that they should specify that to the contracting officer. And I am very happy to go back, review my regulations. I don't think there's anything super specific, but I'll confirm, and at least we can discuss what the policy should be. But certainly notifying the contracting officer has to be an element.
I have a question about the PEP again. Because industry, kind of real life example, the PEP has not been widely applied because I think there's been some confusion.
Yes.
And as we further and further educate, one of the things that we educate obviously small businesses too.
Yes.
And one of the things that the Hubzone firms are also asking, how do I request if the solicitation is silent? Can I request? And the answer from our office has been, yes, go ahead and send an email to the person listed in the solicitation and say that you wish to have the PEP applied. So one of the things that I wanted to mention, which we mentioned in trainings of this nature, is that the acquisition community might be seeing those requests full and open if it is silent from industry themselves. So it's an important, I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more of that as the years come.
And then in that case, they should apply it
to those that request it, but if there is a Hubzone small business that waives it, right?
Yeah. So I would say
what do you think? Yeah.
Well, I don't want to contradict any GAO case law specifically, and I think there is some on this topic. If you're a Hubzone if a Hubzone small business recognizes that a solicitation doesn't contain the clause, they should notify the contracting officer and request that it be put in. If they are, and then if it's in there, and they haven't waived it, then it should be applied. A contracting officer should always apply it if the clause is in place. And any Hubzone offers have not waived it, meaning they don't have to affirmatively request the application once the clause is in the solicitation.
And I'll be honest with you, I'll play devil's advocate. I think a lot of the reason why we have not seen a large use of the PEP is because acquisition personnel are concerned about the 10% increase over what maybe the independent government cost estimate might be, or over that particular proposal, and they may not have the additional funding for that 10%. So that might be a factor as well.
Well, they're not always going to pay 10% more. They just have to, if it's price specific, if we're only looking at price, which is not often the case, but with respect to the price evaluation and the ranking of the offers, the PEP only comes into play if the Hubzone firm is within 10, and this plays out in the math, but if the Hubzone firm's offer is within 10% of the large business prospective awardee, that's when the PEP comes into play. If they're more than 10% off, then the PEP's not going to help them, because that's what you can see in that first example on slide 24. Is they're more than 10% off. So it could be they could always be, they don't, the worst case scenario in terms of the agency not wanting to spend more is if they are a full they're exactly 10%. Their price is exactly 10% more than large business, because then after their evaluation, the prices of the two firms, the large business and the Hubzone firm, would be equal. And I didn't say this, I don't think, but under our rules, if after the PEP is applied, if the prices are equal, you award to the Hubzone firm, or you rank them first. So most of the time, it's not going to be 10%. And so maybe the price ends up being 5% more. But I recognize that concern. I will emphasize, however, that this is not an SBA designed or made-up rule. It's
That's
in
right.
it's in the statute.
That's right.
So it's mandatory. Congress decided we had to do this.
No, absolutely.
So-
Absolutely. But I was just thinking,
Thank
from
you.
a contracting officer's perspective,
Absolutely.
how they see it. But, just understanding that they don't actually have to pay the contractor an additional 10%. I think that's helpful. And really it's evaluating the offer if it's within 10%. And I think that helps to clarify a lot of the confusion around the PEP too for contracting officials. Okay, so here's a comment, a question. Going back to GSA scheduled buys for a hub zone, do we use the hub zone designation when contract was awarded, or do businesses certify at the task order level? Okay, do you understand, or do you want me to reread
this is a good question. And I will want to confirm this in the regs, because I think there has been some confusion, and I don't know if anything. There's these two rules that were referenced in the slides. That one which has been published, and the other which should be published shortly. One of them, the one that's been published already, implements changes that were contained in the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act. That's the one that we've been discussing today, that rule. The other rule that's going to impact the Hubzone program is the Mentor-Protege Rule, as it's been referred to. And that one, the final rule, should be published. So let me say I'll get back to that question so I don't misspeak.
Okay.
But I'm inclined to say that, no, I don't want to misspeak, because my inclination is always we only want to award to Hubzone firms that are affirmatively Hubzone qualified at that time. But I don't
At the time of the order.
But if the long-term contract rules say something different, then again, I don't want to confuse anyone.
Okay.
So I
all
will
right.
get that answer to you.
Okay,
in
that would
writing.
be perfect. That would be perfect. And maybe you might, I don't know if you put comments such as those or Q&A on the website, that might be helpful.
That might be
So that
wonderful. Yes.
everybody.
Why don't I do that?
Yeah, so that everybody can see that response.
Definitely,
Yeah, so
definitely.
that's helpful.
We'll do that.
Absolutely.
That's helpful. Okay, so I don't have any new questions, and I know that you're leaving in about 5 minutes, so I just love having you here. I want to make sure that we take full advantage of you. I know I'm sure John Klein has you extremely busy. So, Allie, limitations on subcontracting, great. The new rules that are going into effect, I think that's excellent. I think it definitely makes it much easier for the contracting officials to just use the program. I think that it really is the key. Demystifying the small business programs, making them easier for the contracting officials to get to those small businesses is really going to make a difference and help all of us with increasing our goals.
Definitely.
So, do you have any last minute comments that you want to share with the audience?
Well, the one thing that you are the most important aspect on this program, because you are the ones that have the opportunity to provide the funding, the awards to firms that have made a commitment to the betterment of the poorest areas of our country. And many of us live very close to hub zones. So please consider the Hubzone firms. As Teresa said at the beginning, most agencies are having difficulty with that. Apply the knowledge that today you learned. We're always available to answer any questions that you have to help you achieve the goals and help the poorest communities of our country. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, again, I'm just truly grateful to have Mariana Pardo, Allison Mueller from the Small Business Administration here to provide us insight and updates on the Hubzone program. I want to have you here at least annually, but if you change the rules more frequently, you're certainly welcome back. And I just want to say thank you again. And I thank you, all of you, for joining us. Please complete your survey. Once you do, which there's a link at the top of the page, then you can receive your certificate. And I thank you, everyone, for joining us today.